Good afternoon, students. Today we have Jessie to talk about career as a nurse and being um, with the Oregon Nurses Association, being a member of the Oregon Nurses Association. But before that, let's do a check-in. As you know, you have to check in. This is your student so that your teacher knows that you're here. And if you have a questions, this is a great questions document that you can reference to. And this is the evaluation form that you need to do right after the event so that we can give you your attendance and credit. And this is a required to graduate when you're in high school. And if the QR code doesn't work, we have the bit.ly link in the chat. Be fully present is a good time to ask questions. And again, this is very important. So I want to emphasize that you need to submit your evaluation right after the event. So let's have Jessie.
Hello, my name is Jesse Kennedy. I'm a registered nurse and a nurse practice consultant for the Oregon Nurses Association. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the various avenues of being a nurse that I have engaged in, and a little bit about how I got to where I am. There we go. I'm assuming it was going to open. So yeah, Jesse Kennedy. As a nurse, there's a huge amount of avenues that you can practice. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ones that I've done and my initial path there. So first off, I started in construction, so I'm a second career nurse. My stepfather owned a construction company, so it was what I was, supposed to do really from the beginning. And I did it all through school, all through high school, and then after school for quite a while, really, until I really started to think about what it is that I wanted to do. So I graduated from Elmira High School. Go Falcons. I don't see any Elmira students on there, but Elmira is a very small town just outside of Eugene, where I live now. I think there was like 50 people in my graduating class, so not a lot of people. But as I said, my stepfather was a general contractor, so I started in construction, then eventually became a general contractor. I liked it well enough. It was enjoyable in general. I liked doing construction. I liked building stuff, but it really wasn't what I wanted to do. And after I had my daughter, I realized that everything that I was telling her to do, I hadn't been following myself. So I'd always told her she could do whatever she wanted to do, be whatever she wanted to be. And I wasn't following my own advice. So after a lot of reflection, I went back and started thinking about things that I really liked to do. Bill Nye was like my hero growing up. Bill Nye the Science Guy. I loved that show. Model rockets, all that kind of stuff. And I really started thinking, what is it that I want to do? What is it that if I had the opportunity to do anything in the world, what would I do? And so I started talking with people who I enjoyed spending time with. One of my good friends is a MD, so I was talking with him quite a bit about his career. I talked with nurse practitioners, and I talked with nurse anesthesiologists, lots of people, and really decided that I wanted to go back to school to be a nurse. It seemed like the best way for me to be able to make an impact on people's lives. And I had spent, after school, I spent quite a bit of time doing volunteer stuff, but during school, I really didn't have much of an opportunity to try to do those things that I was interested in, because as I'm sure many people can relate, my stepdad, really required me to be engaged in the family business, and it wasn't something that I was interested in. But ultimately, it led to me going back to school as an adult. So I went to Lane Community College. There are two main avenues for getting into nursing. The first is an associate's degree. You can get an associate's degree from a community college. LCC, Lane Community College, is where I went, which is in Eugene. I was able to continue working while I did my prerequisites. Would very highly recommend getting as experienced as you can with microbiology, biology, chemistry, all that kind of good stuff. I was always interested in those, and interestingly enough, those are the only AP classes that I took as a high schooler, was AP Bio, and then I also actually took AP Government and AP History. So those were the things that I was the most interested in, and as you'll see here pretty quickly, my career follows kind of both of those things. As soon as I got to LCC, Lane Community College, I found out about the SNA, which is the Student Nurses Association. I pretty quickly got involved with the Student Nurses Association because I was really excited about the things that they were doing. I was excited about vaccine clinics, health fairs, being able to work in the community and try to help people who didn't have as good of access to healthcare as we would want. And then I started doing my clinicals. And in my clinicals, you may hear that term, but what that means is working as a student nurse in a facility. Sometimes it's a hospital, sometimes it's a skilled nursing facility or assisted living. But clinicals are where you engage as a student nurse to start getting that skill set down. And pretty quickly, after doing vaccine clinics and health fairs, I decided that I wanted to do more. So with my SNA at LCC, we decided that we wanted to go to Thailand. The first year that we went there, we raised $17,000, and we worked in Northeast Thailand and Surin, mostly with Cambodian refugees who are kind of in a legal limbo. Thailand does have free healthcare, which we were really interested in learning more about that model and how we might be able to bring something similar back. But the folks that we were mostly working with were kind of in a weird spot where we were able to provide them with a lot of the nursing interventions that we were doing at home in our clinicals, but able to do it there in Thailand. And then just one more quick picture. I was able to meet with the Thai Minister of Health. In that third picture, I got to meet with nursing students in Thailand and learn more about what goes into their degree, the kind of stuff that they learn in their nursing program, and what we might be able to bring back to our country and to our nursing programs, and things that we might be able to do better. So I would say my first lesson learned is learn by doing, collaborate as much as you can with those around you, work with as many backgrounds as possible, and get a really diverse understanding of what it is that you are looking at doing, things that you're interested in, so that as you get involved with them, as you begin to pursue, you can have a much broader understanding of what it is that you're going to be doing for the rest of your life, really, hopefully, right? What you're doing for the rest of your life. The second trip, this is from the second time that we went to Thailand. So I went both of the 2 years that I was in my associate's program at LCC. The second year, we raised all of the money to go. So everybody was fully funded to go. We were able to bring quite a bit of resources to share with the nursing students and with the community hospitals as well. But really, don't be afraid to take on a new initiative or a project. Just because you're inexperienced, jump in and start learning about it, make those connections, meet with people. And while, we were student nurses, we weren't medicine Doctors Without Borders or something like that. It really was a good experience for all of us to learn how to collaborate better, to work better, to work as a team, and to understand what all of those things are that go into nursing practice, both here and abroad. Pretty quickly, I got involved in the OSNA, which is the next step up. We started LCC SNA, which is the school Student Nurse Association. And then I got involved with the Oregon Student Nurses Association. I was the vice president of that group for a year, which was a fantastic experience. I got to meet a lot of new people, a lot of mentors, a lot of nurses who were already engaged in their nursing practice and learn how to begin to tailor my skill set, my experiences, my continuing education to meet those specialty needs that I really wanted to get into. One really amazing thing that I got to do, basically, you know, a year after doing construction full time, I was the MC, the Master of Ceremonies for a lobby day. So I got to go and speak in front of a couple thousand people, which was incredibly scary. I had no idea what I was doing, but it was a really fun experience to step out there and do things that I was not experienced in, and it was really intimidating, but helped me to do things that were outside of my comfort zone and start to feel comfortable with it and start to find those people who could serve as mentors and get a deeper understanding of what it is that nursing does. But that brings me to the next point, which is that with all of this stuff, all I ended up doing was raising my hand, putting myself out there, volunteering for service, nominating myself for things. And to be entirely honest, both OSNA and LCCSNA, the reason why I got involved in leadership of that was because one of my friends just kept poking me. She's like, you would be really interested in this. You would be able to help. And I didn't think that highly of myself. I thought, no, I'm happy to do those things, but I don't think that I could contribute in that way as far as a leadership perspective. But I found that by being open to those calls for candidates, I opened up many doors to what would later be my profession. One of those things was there was a call for people to testify for Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement, which came about in the 90s, which basically meant that tobacco industries had to give states quite a bit of money. But traditionally that money had just been going into a general pool. So there was a call for nursing students and nurses to speak with legislators about what to do with that money. So my very first speaking experience, I went and testified in front of Oregon legislators and was also, again, incredibly nervous. But I was passionate about health, access to healthcare, and ways that we can do a better job of ensuring that everybody has the healthcare that they need. So we'll go to the next slide. And then I ended up becoming the NSNA president. So the National Student Nurses Association. I was the president of that, which is 62, I think now it's about 65,000 members. So again, this is a time frame where I went from about a year and a half from working construction full-time, swinging a hammer and carrying 2x4s, to somehow standing in front of a room of 60,000 people and trying to conduct a House of Delegates. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I was able to gather all of those resources of those people around me who had the resources, who were knowledgeable, who were able to help me navigate all of that, to get me the resources I needed to be able to understand the flow of all of that stuff. And while it was incredibly scary, I was able to do things like I initiated a National Day of Service at NSNA, which still continues today, where every nursing student does a day of service in their communities, and then they work with each other to build upon that. So each year it's getting bigger and better. I did a Words of Wisdom campaign in which individual nurses and nursing instructors and nursing students would do a quick video about things that they found that were really important for their growth, things that helped them to get into the nursing profession, things they wish they had known about the nursing profession, things that they wish they had known earlier before they took all their tests, study tips, whatever it might be. And then the Welcome to the Profession Toolkit, which goes out to nursing students before they graduate to help them figure out what it is to do to get that first job, because that's always the scariest part. It's usually the biggest hurdle, is how do you get into the profession once you've finished your schooling. So that's the next lesson learned, which is join a professional organization. So I would highly recommend whatever profession you choose, hopefully you're going to choose nursing, right? That you join your professional association. So what is a professional association? What does that do? basically a professional association for your individual profession sets the standards of practice. So for nursing, that means the code of ethics, which all nurses have to adhere to, similar to what you may have heard as like the Hippocratic Oath for providers. The code of ethics is a very similar document, which means that every nurse has to abide by the code of ethics in their practice. They also educate the members through continuing education and publications. They advocate for their members on the state and federal level and provide opportunities for networking, mentorship, personal growth, all of those things that you need as an individual to move on to the next phase of your career. All right, so what did I do when I was a direct care nurse? So I mentioned that now I'm a nurse practitioner, or I'm a nurse practice consultant. I'm not a nurse practitioner, I'm a nurse practice consultant. So what did I do initially? Right out of my 2-year degree. So there, as I had mentioned, there are 2 entry levels into nursing. The first one would be an associate's degree, which would come from a community college. As soon as I graduated from LCC, I was a float pool nurse, which means that right before coming into work for my shift for the day, I would call in about an hour early and they would tell me which unit I was working on. So when you're in the float pool, each individual nurse is trained and is competent on generally about 4 units. So I was competent on 4 units, which means that when I would come into work, I would work on one of those 4 units. Each of those units was a different type of specialty. So like post-surgical recovery. So if you get surgery in the hospital, I would take care of those people after they'd come out of surgery and they were healing. I also worked in neurology, which is where folks would be healing after a stroke or anything related to that, really. And then also orthopedics, which is a type of surgery, a specialty for people who get like joint replacement surgery, things like that. So I worked in 4 different specialties as a float pool nurse, which is always a really good idea for people who are just out of nursing school to really get a broad understanding of what it looks like. I would say that oftentimes the first few years as a nurse, you're probably going to be working night shift, which wasn't something that I was used to. As I said, I'd done construction for a long time, so I was used to dawn till dusk, and that's what my rhythm had always been. And then I was pretty quickly working night shift, which meant that I was working from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Generally for most of the time that I was in that float pool. And then the facility that I worked at started another float pool called the critical care float pool, which meant that a smaller group of nurses was trained in intensive care, in the emergency room, in post-anesthesia recovery unit or PACU, and in the emergency department, ICU, ED, PACU. Yeah. But basically it was a similar thing in that I would call in the hour before my shift was supposed to start and I would find out where I was working. And that gave me a really good exposure to the different specialties of critical care. And I got to look at what I wanted to focus my specialty practice on. With that, I was able to learn all of the things that I needed to start educating myself more on, continuing education. So even after you graduate from college, in most careers, you're going to have to continue to learn every day, right? There's continuing education stuff, even if it's not necessarily a requirement for your licensure. There are a lot of things that you want to keep up on, and nursing is definitely one of those things where you're going to need to continue to educate yourself, take classes, and ensure that you're providing the best care possible. Because really the goal of nursing is to keep people safe, help people get back to their normal life. After my associate's degree, I took another path that some people take, which is to do an RN to BSN. So I did my associate's degree at Lane Community College. And then while working as a nurse in their critical care float pool, I did an RN to BSN program, which means that I was working and taking classes online. So that's another avenue for folks who want to get into the nursing professions. The associate degree is really good for helping get the skills and the understanding to function on an individual nursing unit. but the BSN, or Bachelor's of Science in Nursing, is very important if you want to increase your earning potential, but also if you want to get into those specialty areas that require a lot more collaboration, a lot more teamwork, a lot more things like epidemiology and an understanding of how everything that you do affects the broader system. So I did an RN to BSN program at OHSU. One of the really interesting things that I was able to do while I was in the RN to BSN program was that my last class was really, it's called a capstone. It's where you start to look at what it is that you want to do long-term in your career. And our professor was asking each of us, what we wanted to do, what we wanted to get out of the class, so that she could help tailor the course for our personal goals. And I had learned at that time that Oregon had one of the highest vaccine exemption rates, which means people choosing not to get vaccines, specifically related to students, really. So vaccine exemption rates were 7% in Oregon, which is considered actually pretty high in the rest of the country. And to give context to that, an exemption rate of 5% is considered dangerous by the CDC and the WHO. So Oregon definitely has had quite a long ways to go as far as getting those vaccination rates up. When I shared with her what I was interested in, she helped me to write a grant proposal. And if you haven't heard of a grant proposal, what that means is that you write this paper about your ideas, what it is that you want to do, and how you feel that that's going to affect things, whatever that may be. And the thing that I was most excited about, as we saw earlier, and what I was doing at LCC and abroad, was vaccinations is something that I'm really passionate about. So I wrote a grant proposal to create Nurses for a Healthier Community, which would provide vaccines to nurses around the state and help to provide that education, because all of Oregon's nurses are qualified to give education and to administer vaccines. And it seemed like a really obvious way to help with getting those vaccines to people. Unfortunately, what happened was that the whole project ended up getting rolled into bigger programs like Immunize Oregon, which is fine. Ultimately, it ended up working out. But it was a really good learning experience for me to understand that even as a student nurse, I was able to have a pretty big impact on the health and welfare of Oregon, even if it was something that was, more of from a 50,000 foot view, or from higher up, from a broader perspective, which would bring me to the next lesson learned, which is being open to mentors. Basically, my professor's interest in my grant proposal and pushing me to write that grant proposal was a form of mentorship. She offered up to me the idea. She helped me to do all of it. She guided me to all of the resources. And I've had a lot of really powerful mentors in my life, and I'm sure you're encountering them on a regular basis. I think the one that stands out the most to me, the mentor that really helped me to understand that I did have something to contribute, was my high school government teacher, Mr. Churbis, Dean Churbis. He was a fantastic mentor and role model, and helped me to understand that, I didn't just have to do construction. I really could still put myself out there and get involved in AP classes and try to set myself up for success later in life. I didn't mean to move it, but this article that I wanted to highlight just briefly talks about mentoring. Traditionally has been defined as a developmental relationship between an older, more experienced, probably more educated person serving as a mentor to a younger, less experienced person who was getting educated. And this article by Dr. Connie Vance really pushed a new definition of mentoring, which I really liked, which is power mentoring, being active in a broad, diverse network of multiple mentoring relationships, opportunities, and connections. So it doesn't have to be that really formal mentorship thing that you may have heard of. It's also building those connections with people who you respect in your life and using them as a mentor as well. Then I decided, I don't know why, to put myself out there again. And I ran for the American Nurses Association. So I was the first recent graduate on the ANA Board of Directors, which was amazing. It was a lot of fun. I got to meet, honestly, my very first day on the Board of Directors, I met the people who were writing my textbooks for the classes that I was taking, which was like one of those amazing experiences where you realize that all of the books you're reading, all of the people you might encounter, like the legislators, they're all people. They're people who have decided to be very specific about what they want to do. They are excited about what they do, and they are dedicated to what they do. So being able to meet the faculty who were writing the books was just amazing to me, and showed that we can do just about anything. As you can see from the picture, although we were trying to be serious and wearing suits, it was all a lot of fun. And as you get in, if you get involved with any professional association, you'll find that everybody really enjoys the camaraderie, the teamwork, the collaboration, the overall understanding that we're all in this together. All right. At this time, after I graduated from my bachelor's program, I was able to start focusing on what it is that I really wanted to do, which was getting into intensive care. So I became an intensive care staff nurse, and I worked in an ICU, which was definitely one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. But unfortunately, as I progressed through it, I ended up needing to find a different, less intense way to be able to practice nursing. And the thing that was the most interesting to me was clinical nurse educators. And that's because of my desire to be able to work with others and to help empower nurses and build leaders. So it led me to being a clinical nurse educator. I was in ICU for 3 years, and then I was a clinical nurse educator for 3 years. The first 2 years I worked in a facility, and then the third year I decided that I wanted to try to have a bigger, broader impact. And so I ended up becoming the clinical nurse educator for the system, which meant that I was able to work with all of the nurses that were in the healthcare system that I worked in. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm a nurse practice consultant for ONA right now. I've been with ONA now since 2019, which has been an amazing experience for me to be able to work with ONA's 15,000 nurses that are members. I work directly with nurses across the state on stuff like nurse staffing committees, professional nurse coordinating committees. I create a lot of continuing education. I work with members across the state to create those continuing education modules and to ensure that nurses who may be in a specialty that they're looking to move out of into a different specialty, that the nurses who are experienced in that, we help them to write content so that other nurses are able to take that content and to tailor their career paths to be able to move into that, because sometimes it's not always straightforward as to what it is that you need to do to get into a specialty within nursing. But as you can see already, I've been able to do quite a few different types of nursing roles and look at many of the different avenues in which you can, as a nurse, contribute. I would say that as far as the nursing forecast goes, there is a huge need for nurses coming up. There's an anticipated shortage of almost 3 million nurses within the country in the next 5 to 10 years. So it is something that will be increasing pretty rapidly, especially as there's other ways of delivering nursing care and getting your health care. Like right now, for example, most people would go to the hospital for things that in the very near future, you'll be able to go to a clinic or a doctor's office or something outside of the hospital. And so with that, there's a lot of positions that are opening up outside of the hospital, especially community health, especially community psychiatric health. The average annual income for nurses in Oregon is $98,000, and there's an average annual opening of 2,600 openings per year in Oregon, which is quite a bit. And I would say that every facility within Oregon is trying to hire. Nobody has enough nurses right now. It's always something that will be there. It's always something that, as a nurse, as you build your experience, as you build the things that, as you find what it is that you want to do within nursing, there's always going to be opportunities for you to work and to grow. Some of the most important skills, I would say, for nursing is social perceptiveness, really understanding people's reactions, engaging with them, talking to them, looking for ways to help people. Critical thinking is always a really big one. And then active listening, I could not stress enough. Listening to people, trying to understand what it is that they're saying. And as I'm sure you've known with your teachers, that sometimes when you try to explain something the first time, it doesn't come across in a way that people can understand. So active listening is really going to help you as you progress as a nurse, to be able to hear what others are saying and to adjust your message so that they can understand what it is that you're trying to tell them. What would I have done differently? That's a big one. As I had said, I did construction all through high school. I worked almost full time in high school, which I would not recommend. I wasn't able to do a lot of those additional things that I wanted to do. But I would definitely focus more on my grades, focus more on AP classes, so that when I did get to college, that I would have less classes to take, which means less loans. With that, I would also encourage, and I would have definitely done more volunteer work. So engaging with volunteer opportunities, because that does really help a lot when you are looking for your first job. It helps immensely when you are trying to get scholarships, so you don't come out of nursing school with $100,000 in debt. Hopefully that's not something that happens. But I'm still paying on my school loans because I've done quite a bit of schooling, but I think all of the stuff that I've done, I've been really happy with, I've been really engaged with. And scholarships are good. So anything you can do to open yourself up to more of those scholarships would be fantastic. So that brings me to the biggest lesson: is don't fear failure. When I was running for the ANA board, when I was running for NSNA, doing all of those things that in my mind I wasn't qualified for, but I had to step out there. I had to not fear failure. I had to adapt. I think that's probably the second biggest part of failure, is that we often think of failure as a bad thing, but oftentimes failure is the way that you learn not to do it next time. So one of my favorite economists and is Tim Hartford, and he talks about failure as a way to learn what not to do, failure as a way to understand yourself better. But we're all going to have a ton of mistakes, right? Even if you start looking from, the nursing perspective, biology, you start thinking about, I don't know, COVID-19, right? Everything adapts. Everything has to learn from its mistakes and get better. So we have to build on what doesn't work and adapt. And with that, I can also say that I have applied for my PhD. So we'll see how that goes. That's one of those things that I'm putting myself out there again for. I applied for a PhD in nursing with OHSU, Oregon Health and Science University, and I'll find out at the end of the month. So let's hope that goes well. But, you've got to put yourself out there if you're ever going to succeed. And I think this is my favorite quote of all time. And it's something that I always tell my kids, and it's something that I always put into every presentation I do. This is from Robert F. Kennedy. You may have heard of him, Bobby Kennedy. It was JFK's brother. But only those who dare to fail greatly can ever achieve greatly, which to me is a really important lesson for life in general. And all I can say is dare greatly. And if you're not putting yourself out there, if you're not trying, if you're not being vulnerable and risking intimidation, you're already failing by default. All right. Are there any specific questions that you all would like me to answer? And yeah.
So we have questions in the chat. Do you want me to read it or
Oh,
you're gonna?
sure, I didn't notice that. Um, you ever thought that this career is a lot harder than being a general contractor? I don't know. It definitely is different. I would say that being a general contractor was a lot harder on my body. And the thing that I generally wasn't comfortable with is that really in construction, well, if you're working for someone in construction, you get paid an hourly wage, right? But if you want to be a general contractor, that means that you are doing bids, you have contracts with clients, and in general, I just felt like the biggest drawback from being a general contractor was that in order for me to make money, somebody else had to be making a lot less money. So whether that means you're taking some of the money from the drywallers, if you're trying to get a better deal on the drywall contractors and things like that, I didn't really feel comfortable with that. So for me, getting into a profession where I was always helping people, where that was my total role was to help people, felt a lot better to me. Um, Hours are obviously different. I'm working from home right now, as you can see in my background. So that's helpful. I don't have to leave my house. Although when I was working in the hospital, I would work, but generally I would work 3 shifts a week, which was nice. So I worked 3 days a week. In most nursing facilities that work 12-hour shifts, you generally work 3 shifts a week. So that means you're off the rest of the week, which was really nice. Be able to spend a lot more time at home. And then I actually started liking construction again. I actually started liking building stuff again and doing projects at home. What are the different areas of nursing? So there is an almost unlimited number of areas for nursing. There is nursing in the traditional sense, like I talked about, working in a hospital, where even in the hospital, there's a lot of different specialties as far as the nurses that assist with operating rooms, nurses that do the specialty procedures, nurses that help to knock people out, put them under for surgery, which is a nurse anesthetist. There are other specialties like working in a psychiatric unit or behavioral health, working in the community. We have in Oregon one of the few community operated mental health resources that are mobile. So we have Cahoots, which is a big resource for people in Oregon that are going through a mental health crisis. They can call Cahoots and nurses will come and help talk you through whatever is going on. And then there are things like what I do, which is generally creating education, doing development work with people that are already nurses, but then also helping those who are in pre-professional programs or pre-nursing programs to find what it is that they want to engage in. We have nurses who are lobbyists, which means they work directly with legislators and they're able to share the nursing experience with legislators who may not necessarily get those sort of experiences. So there's working at the bedside, which could mean any number of things. There's working in the community. There are nurses, obviously, when you go to a doctor's office and things like that. So there's quite a few areas of nursing. My wife started her nursing career as a CNA, which is a certified nursing assistant. And she started doing that when she was in high school. She immediately went from being a CNA to being a nurse. And she worked at first in a critical access hospital, which is like a small hospital that's kind of rural. And then she ended up working in home health. And so she was a home health nurse. And she, one of the things she did was to take care of individuals who had severe disabilities. So she would take these kids to school. She would make sure that they had everything that they needed to be able to function in society as at the highest level that they could. So she was a full-time nurse for a lot of those people. I have a friend who is a travel nurse, which means that she goes, well, so there's a travel nurse, which means you can go to other states and work, but she's a travel nurse from the perspective that people who need that sort of care, who might have a tracheostomy, or they might have breathing treatments that they have to do. She goes pretty regularly to like Bora Bora. She goes to pretty amazing places with clients and provides all of the medical care that they need while they're on their trip. So she has been all over the world. She's on her since we graduated in 2014. She's filled up 3 passports with all of the countries that she's been to with clients, which is a pretty amazing area of nursing if you're interested in travel. When you're a float pool nurse and when you were a float pool nurse and ICU nurse, what aspect of the occupation did you like best and least? When I was a float pool nurse, I really liked the opportunity to look at different specialties. So each day I would generally be in a different one of those 4 units, which was great to be able to approach every shift from a new perspective. So I wasn't necessarily engaged in what I would say is the least favorite thing, which happens at all jobs, but it's all of the, I don't know, the gossip and the infighting and all that kind of stuff. So I really like to be able to be separate from that. What did I like the least? It may seem counterintuitive since I'm a nurse, but I really generally don't like the idea of giving just medications to solve everything. I really like the model where we look at all of the things that you could do as an individual to help with your health. And I think oftentimes when we are talking about hospitals in particular, we look at what pill is going to help you, what medication you're going to take for the rest of your life, rather than what is it that we can do to help improve your overall health. And that's really why I ended up getting into the ICU rather than the float pool, was because every medication that I gave had a very specific purpose, and it was not related to like long-term chronic conditions in general. While they were in the ICU, I had a very specific goal in mind. I had very specific outcomes that I was trying to get to, which helped me to be able to provide the best care that I could for those individuals and look at the biggest range of healthcare interventions that I could. Because when you work in an ICU as a nurse, you generally have 1 patient for the day, maybe 2 patients for the day. So you get to really focus on those individuals and their families and come up with care plans that look at the entirety of the person and everything that they engage with, their environment, the people that they're engaging with, their eating activities, their exercise, their mental health, their spiritual health, all of those things you're able to engage with much more broadly in the ICU than in the float pool, where generally I would have anywhere from 5 to 7 patients on a given shift. And a lot of that was more management of chronic conditions, management of what they were dealing with in the moment, rather than being able to focus more specifically on the broader range of things that might help them to get out of the hospital and get to a place where they have a higher level of health before or after the hospital than they did before. Would you recommend the 2-year or 4-year degree for nursing? I don't know. I've often thought about that. I did the 2-year degree to start with because that's what made the most sense to me, given what I was doing. I already had a family at that point, so doing a 4-year degree where I wasn't able to work that whole time wasn't as attractive for me. But at the same time, doing a straight 4-year degree is generally quite a bit quicker than doing the route that I did, which was prerequisites, then associate degree, and then my bachelor's degree. So that took basically a total of 6 years to get a 4-year degree. And if I were to have gone directly to a 4-year program, I would have been able to get it all done in 4 years, really. So I ended up getting a 4-year degree, but it took me 6 years. So at least I was able to work the whole time, which was something that was important to me. So that's why I would say both are good entry points into the profession, but I would always recommend getting the bachelor's degree, getting the 4-year degree, even if you start with a 2-year degree, because it does open a lot more doors for you, and it opens a lot more options as far as your career goes and things you might be able to do. What AP classes do you think would be most beneficial to take in preparation for this career? So as I said, I loved Bill Nye the Science Guy. I love science. I loved chemistry. I loved biology. Every school has a different range of those things. The school that I went to, as I said, was a smaller school, but I would definitely recommend AP biology and AP chemistry. Those are the things that helped me immensely to understand what it was that I was doing in those first 2 years of my associate's degree. The 2-year degree is very fast paced once you actually get into the program. So I did have prerequisites that I had to take to qualify for the program. But once I was in the 2-year program, it was very fast paced. There's not a lot of time to like go back through and relearn all of those basics of chemistry and biology. So having that background really helped me, even though mine was generally more informal. So I would say any formal education you can get as far as AP classes for biology and chemistry would be a really good idea. Would you choose this career if you could make the decision again? What, if anything, would you do differently? I would definitely do this career again. What I would do differently is probably start this right in the beginning, so that I could have more time to get into the area that I'm in now, which is what I'm really excited about, which is empowering other nurses, being engaged in the direction of the nursing profession. If I had it to do all over again, I would definitely try to cut off some of that extra time. But at the same time, I think that there is value in everything that you do. And as you are looking at your career, it's important to pull in all of those various experiences to show that that's how you got to where you are now. That's why you are engaged in with what you are now. So as you're filling out your resumes and your CVs as you get older, I guess my CV now, my curriculum vitae, which is a bigger, longer form of resume. I think my CV is like 28 pages now, which is ridiculous. But it's important to try to encapsulate all those experiences that you have to show what it is that you are bringing to the table. So all of those experiences, I had when I was in high school, when I worked at doing construction, while that may not necessarily translate directly into nursing, it did give me a lot of opportunity to work with realtors, to work directly with homeowners in trying to understand their needs, to work with architects, to build those skills of collaboration, of teamwork, of being able to lead a crew and find that common objective and figure out a way to share it with everybody so that everybody was on the same page. So while it may not, everything you do may not seem like it's directly applicable to what it is you end up wanting to do, it's really important to try to bring all of those things in and show how they are contributing to who you are as a person and why you're a good candidate for whatever the career is that you're looking at. How tricky was it to change your career? It was difficult. As I mentioned, everybody's, family life is different, but it was really difficult for me to be able to leave my family business, my stepdad's business. He did not like it, and it became a really big issue for a while, but it did help me to know what was important to me. And because, like I said, I was telling my daughter she could be whatever she wanted. And at that time, she wanted to be an astronaut. So I couldn't rightfully, honestly tell her that if I wasn't also willing to do the same thing. So it was difficult, but it took a lot of, it showed me how tough I am with being able to make those decisions despite, any sort of outside influences. And it was also a really good experience to work through it. So I did construction full time while I was doing my prerequisites and taking all night classes. And then once I started full-time nursing school, I only worked half-time, but it was a good experience for me. And I don't know that I would necessarily give that up, but if I had it to do all over again, I probably would have done that a lot sooner. When you're doing NSNA and went to Thailand, why Thailand? Do they have better nursing or healthcare system? We ended up going to Thailand for a couple of reasons. So one is that they use English terminology for all of their diagnoses and medications. They use all English for that, which was helpful for us to be able to work directly with nursing students who were using a lot of the same nursing diagnoses as we were. The medications were similar, but the biggest reason was because of their healthcare system, which we were really excited to learn more about in Thailand, and especially in the rural areas like Surin, where we were. The nurses in the hospitals would go out to the villages. So the villages would get visited at least once a month by a huge team of nurses. So the team that would go out would be 2 or 3 nurse practitioners. There would be nurses who were working generally in the hospital, but they were community health nurses employed by the hospital. And then there would also be a pretty sizable group of student nurses. So we were able to work within that framework of being able to deliver care in a different setting than we were used to. So we had generally done all of our clinicals in the hospital, but we were able to work with those nurses in the villages and be able to provide that care there in a new way. And part of that we were able to learn from all those other nursing students about was really trying to find ways to impact people in the place that they live, in their setting, and things that they're comfortable with. So one of the really interesting things that those students were doing was to develop different types of exercise equipment for people who had suffered a stroke, and to come up with ways that individuals could do that with stuff that they had around the house. So they came up with a lot of innovative ways of developing exercises that, we wouldn't necessarily think about when you're working in a hospital setting all the time. So what do you have around the house that you can put together in a way that helps to provide you with eye-hand coordination and improvement for post-stroke stuff? When you were working in the ICU, have you ever experienced losing a patient? Yeah, a lot, actually. For some reason, I found that I was really good at engaging with family members and with the people who were passing away, to help them engage with each other and find that camaraderie, that friendship, and enjoy the times that they had together, rather than focusing on the event that was coming. But instead, I was able to really help them to engage with each other and find peace and joy in the times that they were able to share together. So that was definitely one of the things that one of the reasons why I left the ICU was I ended up dealing with a lot of those situations pretty frequently, because I was good at it, but eventually it did take a toll to where I wasn't as interested in doing that all the time. But I think most of the time, when you're in the ICU, things have gotten pretty serious for you to be in the ICU. So it was really important for me to be able to engage with them and, do handprints, lock of hair, things like that, so that they could enjoy everything that they had been able to experience with their family member, rather than just feeling the sorrow that everybody feels when they lose someone. What is your advice to students who are thinking of taking this career? Definitely get as involved as you can in anything science related, anything biology related, chemistry related, but also it's really important to be able to have open, engaging conversations with other individuals. So even things like debate, things that help you to see problems from others' viewpoints is really important. And that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about debate, was you can't just continue saying something in the exact same way and expect to get a different response from someone. So when you're in debate, if you have a debate club, I would definitely recommend that. But when you're debating someone, you have to see what it is that they're arguing and try to approach what it is that you are trying to advocate for in a different way that may move the conversation forward, right? So when you're having those conversations with individuals in nursing, oftentimes the way that makes the most sense to you to explain something, or the way that you understand something, isn't necessarily the way that other people understand the same thing. So it's really important to learn how to have those conversations, to practice active listening to understand what people are saying, and try to be really empathetic as to what it is that they're feeling, what they're trying to say. Because honestly, most of the time when you're nursing either in a hospital or in a long-term care facility, you're probably dealing with people on what is potentially the worst day of their life or close to it. They're not necessarily in a really good place. So it's important to have empathy and understanding and collaborate with all of your coworkers to find what it is that helps those people to get to a better state of health, and to understand what it is that you need them to be able to understand to be able to get healthier. And also to understand that what you think is healthy is not necessarily what everybody else thinks is healthy. What you think is obvious is not obvious to everyone else. So it's really important to try to get as many of those diverse viewpoints as you can, talk with everyone you can. If people disagree with you, find out what it is that makes them believe that. Why is it that they are so passionate about something? And hopefully when you have those conversations, you understand a little bit better about where those people are coming from. Even if you make no progress in changing their opinion, I don't try to change people's opinion, but if I can understand a little bit more about their opinion, it can help inform my opinion on topics, even if we don't agree, even if we come away from the conversation with still entirely different viewpoints. The important thing for me is that I learned something about that person. I, in the process, learned something more about myself. There's my email address if anybody wants to ask me questions later. Looks like we're getting pretty close to the end of the time.
Yeah. Well, students, if you guys want to put anything else in the chat, feel free. If not, if you need to hop on, hop off, that'd be fine too. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.